Hi and welcome to week 10 of Mya Bifrost training. This week we're going to be covering the most difficult aspect of fluid simulation creation, which is director feedback. So unfortunately, one of the most difficult parts about simulation is that you don't have direct control over the adjustment of the movement of liquid, fire, gas, and other pyrotechnic and fluid-based computational simulations. For example, if the director was saying in this scene, I love the bullet hits, but can we make them like slightly sort of bend to the left, and can we make one of them like splash up and form into like, an evil face, or like the Nike logo, or something like really crazy. It's one of those things where people are so used to animation in Maya and Houdini, where you can just say any kind of movement or thing to helicopters and cars and characters and stuff, and the animator can in 1 second just move that arm down or move the helicopter across or change the curves and just play blast it again, and it's like exactly how they want the scene to look. It's just one of those things where it just doesn't work that way with simulations. You really have to plan out what's happening in advance, and then do like a low-res sim of what you're working on, approve the low-res sim in its final position, movement, speed, and all that sort of thing, and then the high-res sim is actually kind of locked off and you already know what's happening with it. You don't sort of like just look at render and simulate high-res sims and just go, yeah, that looks pretty good, let's just check out 50 different versions of that. You really need to sort of do it in advance, and then the high-res sim, you know exactly what you're gonna get out right at the very end. This is the way I've seen the workflow work at Animal Logic with Legend of the Guardians for those fire waves and rain tunnel sequences. Huge amount of storyboarding and concept art done in advance. There was very crude particle simulations done to set everything up in advance. And the advantage of doing all that pre-planning was that once the movement and the speed and the motion of the fire wave and all the liquid tunnel was finished, it enabled the final high-res simulation to be exactly where everyone assumed it would be. So they didn't have to, spend run the 100-hour simulation like 67 times to continuously reposition it and change its speed and change its curving and change its, all those sort of settings. And a lot of the comping and stuff is just so easy to do, change in Nuke the look of it as opposed to the speed and things like that. So review notes often will come in. You'll be asked to make it faster, you'll be asked to make it higher, you'll be asked to move it around and manipulate it and change it. And often, the huge amount of complexity and difficulty of these simulations just makes it very, very difficult to, pull through these review notes. So here's all my tips I can give you for reviewing water simulations. So the first thing that we're going to do is this simulation, we're going to assume that there's going to be, a lot of back and forth. The number one thing to do is just educate your VFX soups, educate the compositors that are in charge of you, educate everyone along the pipeline how this simulation in Bifrost or Naiad or whatever different software or Houdini, how it actually works, and that you have to actually storyboard and plan out the precise look of what you're doing before you set out to do it. So what you can do, if there's no storyboards for your shot, which there should be, you can draw them yourself with the effects in them, and you can say, draw over the previs, like in this scene, and you can say, "Dear FX supervisor, would you like the bullet hits in the water to look like option 1 in the red or option 2 in the blue?" Because on YouTube, I've looked at reference footage, and the Navy, when they were shooting the 50 cal bullets into the sea, looked like option 2, but if you shoot a M60 into the sea that's shallow, it looks like number 1, because there's sand and debris in the in the explosions. So we would like to discuss, before we do the sim, which look of splash you would like. Do you want them spraying outwards? Do you want them spraying upwards? And get the go-ahead from there. And that sort of pre-planning conversation, it might take 5 minutes, can save you weeks of back and forth of simulation time, because people just don't understand that you have to actually, the time that's involved in actually getting these things working, and to change it after you've gotten to the final stages is just so painstaking and difficult. So this is like a first pass simulation that we're gonna pretend to submit for review. So this is the first version that we're doing. The other thing to explain to them is, supervisor, while we're in these initial stages that might go through 100 revisions, do you mind if we just sim a section to lock off the real nice look of the splashes, the bullet hits? Then once we're happy with that, we can go ahead with simming the whole length of the shot. And most times they'll be more than happy to accommodate a low res or a section of the sim. So this sim is both low res and it's a small section. We've submitted that to review in a quick time to the FX supervisor, and his review notes for the shot, as he's the sequence supervisor, are as follows. He said, for this shot, looks pretty good. Could we make the water splashes about 50% larger and higher to see what that looks like, and move the shoreline a bit closer to the bullet hits? Good first pass, like good try for your first go. So that's his notes before we send it to the director. It's common to have the FX supervisor, who's in charge of the whole sequence, to organize the different artists so that all their work looks consistent and works together for that sequence. So first thing to do is you sequentially name and number your versions, and you sequentially name and number your quick times that you submit for review, because more often than not, sometimes the director goes back 3 or 4 versions to version 4 and goes, actually version 4 is I like it the best, go with that one. And you have to be able to go back into your scene and load up previous versions that link up with reviews. So version 4 review QuickTime must be version 4 Maya file, if that makes sense. So what I've done here is I've just got the bullets, which are the colliding and accelerating objects that are pushing up this fluid, and we've just increased their size by 200%, so that they're double the size, the scale that they were before. And then I'm just going to resim this section of water, and I'm going to see how that looks, how that looks second time. So just make sure that you're answering the question. You're not just trying to make it look cool yourself. Try and be relevant with your review changes, because sometimes they're not asking for better, they're asking for different. They might say, can you make it red instead of blue? Can you make it big instead of small? Can you make it fast instead of slow? They're not asking for any kind of visual improvement. They're just wanting to modify the actual setup itself. So you can see here we've got our bigger cannonballs that are coming up through the water, and that's creating much larger, cooler, more dramatic looking sort of explosions off that water surface. So you can see here that's already a lot bigger, a lot higher, and it's spraying out a little bit, but because this is a low res sim, it's not going to have a lot of detail in the actual splashes themselves as they come up. But straight away we can see, just in terms of scale, this is looking much more, heavy machine gun, missiles sort of explosion, rather than, like a handgun getting shot into the water. So this is our second pass. So once you finish that, you can just play blast it or render it and resubmit that to your effects supervisor. or your VFX supervisor. And if you're at a TV show place, you'll show that to the compositor. And then the notes that we get back from this new setup that we've got from the FX soup read as follows. So he's sent it back in Instant Messenger. Review number 2. Looks much better. Would it be possible to get some more detail into those splashes so that they look larger in scale? So, you know, compositors and VFX soups and effects soups, the scale of effects is really crucial, and they're used to like often comping in real footage of elements, you know, being senior citizens in sometimes cases, but also you know, coming from a traditional comping background before this kind of effects simulation software was out, you would actually get filmed footage of bullets firing into water, and you'd actually comp that all in shake or flame into the scene, and that would actually be your bullets hits. So they'd obviously look photoreal and they'd look large in scale, so they don't have any patience for kind of epoxy looking 3D elements that are done today. You really need to have the detail and the scale look exactly as good as live action footage is going to look. So what we've done here is, to increase the scale, I've simply decreased the voxel size from 0.2 to 0.08, and that actually gives it a much more detailed particle and voxel simulation, which will make these water explosions look really a lot larger in scale. So once we've play blasted that shot, the section of water that we're using as the demo section actually shows us how that will actually interact with the water. And that's like, you know, it looks larger in scale. It's 200% larger than the first pass. And once the VFX soup is happy with the you know, the movement of this water and the scale and the speed and things like that, that will actually now allow us to sim the whole length of this bridge and get really super nice results from that water. We can already see the detail in that spray. It's really good. So the new review notes from that animation is the new detail looks great. Is it possible to increase the speed of the splashes? They look like they're in slow motion. Also, can we use a deformer on the mesh and reposition those splashes if we have to? So this could be a question from a comper who's a VFX supervisor who may not be 100% down to what happens in Maya. So all you need to do is write back to them in Instant Messenger, or just explain to them in the review that the speed is a really common thing you'll get asked to change. Now, in the software itself, you can probably adjust the speed in the future, but it can also be adjusted by stretching out the keyframes of the helicopter and the car and the planks of wood smashing to 200% using a script. And then the Bifrost simulation, you can actually sim it at normal speed and then compress the frames in comp, and that will actually make the water go at double speed in the actual animation final render. You just have to make sure your motion blur settings are correct. But in this note here, in regard to repositioning the mesh or splashes, once you've got the bullets coming out of the water, it's not like animation where you can like push this splash a little bit to the left and a bit to the right after you've actually simulated it. The only way to actually move those splashes around, you can't move them in comp. You can only move them in 3D by moving the collision objects. So you just have to explain to them the difference between regular Maya stuff, which is animated, where you can just reposition, you know, you can reposition stuff and move it around, and you can reposition stuff in comp as well. But with Bifrost and any other kind of fluid simulation, these individual bullet hits, you can't translate them after the fact in Maya. The only way you can translate them is by re-simulating the simulation. And that's why it's important to educate them on the importance of planning and the importance of storyboards and previs for where these actual splashes hit. So, if this sequence was, on a serious movie, the VFX company that would be doing it would be animating previs cones or previs cylinders where each one of these bullets is going to impact in the water, and the timing and the diameter and everything would be all planned out in advance in previs, so that the effects artists can go in and just put everything over the top without having to set up everything from scratch. So I'm just sort of illustrating here how you can easily translate the collision object backwards or forwards or left or right if they're asked, but you can't reposition the splash. And what oftentimes might look like a look of a splash shape, they just want it moved a bit sideways, but it's going to be totally different. The second thing you need to educate them on is scale. I've often been asked, I was asked once by a compositor who needed in the afternoon a real flow simulation of a flooded river for a quick TV commercial they were doing. They understood that real flow could simulate water, and they understood that it could do simulations of photoreal quality. But what they really wanted was photoreal render that looked like this, basically, and that's exactly what they were expecting the level of detail to be. So you can see this river. You would need 500 gig of RAM, some SSD RAID hard drives, a massively expensive graphics card to even consider tackling a Bifrost simulation that looks this detailed and is meshed and is shaded. You're not going to be able to do it in an afternoon. So all you need to do is just say, look, the limitations of this software in that time frame is that you just need it for a quick TV commercial for for the news or something. It's really best designed in sort of a couple of hours. It can really output more this type of scale of water simulation. So if they needed to drop Channel 9 logo into water, or they needed some text to come out of water, easily in a couple of hours you could come out with this kind of result in Mental Ray, where you've got a couple of passes rendered out and the graphics or the sting or the whatever coming out of it. But in those shorter time frames for TV commercials and stuff like that, you just need to educate them that even though you've bought this software, it doesn't automatically push a button and a river comes out of it. Because what they'll do is if you're honest with them and you just say, look, in that short time frame, small scale is going to happen, but not big scale, they'll understand and they'll use comped elements of flooded rivers or tsunamis or waves or stuff like that. And it will save you an awful lot of frustration and pain and heartache with regards to low budget and TV commercial facilities and post companies that do that invest in expensive software like RealFlow and Naiad and things like that and Maya, and they just expect that you just push a button and rivers come out of it. It just doesn't work that way. So you can easily do this if you work on a feature film and it's for an Indiana Jones type movie, and you've got 3 or 4 months to work on it and you've got plenty of computer horsepower at your disposal. But it's just not going to work for for short turnaround things that you've got a day to do, no matter how clever you are. So this is another scene. This is just showing the meshing of that particle simulation, and we're just going to go over now quickly how you can adjust the mesh using lattices. Now, this won't always work in all scenarios, and it's not officially supported by Bifrost at all, but this is something we used in H2O for a lot of the underwater swimming characters, where we simulated a particle Maya system, meshed it in RealFlow, and then we're able to import that mesh into Maya and add a deformer lattice to it, and you could actually sort of stretch things around and animate them and move them and stuff like that. And it actually worked pretty neat. But the reason I'm showing you this is if the director just wants you to just squish it down exactly how it is, but just make it sort of like half the height or half the, a little bit lower or a bit flatter or something like that. You can actually go in and adjust the mesh as long as the lattice is going right outside the extents of it. So we're just going to load on like a white shader so that we can see what's going on. And once you've done that, all you need to do is go onto the animation menu and load on a lattice with like 3x3 deformer. Now, one thing to note is, see how densely tessellated this mesh is? It's going to be really slow on the best of systems to actually deform this kind of geometry, but you're still able to do it if you're patient. And what you can do is you can stretch splashes out or squish them down with those files that you're reading. But if they go outside the extents of the lattice, they'll actually go back to their default position and size and things like that. So you just really need to make sure that the extents of the lattice don't have any kind of liquid coming outside of it. So it'll take a while to get that lattice on there. But once it's on, you'll see that you can push and pull the meshed Bifrost shape, and you can squish down the water, or you can pull it up, and that might help you. Like, don't do it too much because it'll look stretched, but the same way as in Photoshop has, you can adjust just that little bit of detail that you want to change. You can easily stretch it up or stretch it down and get those splashes looking a little bit flatter or a little bit more violent and more higher, depending on what you're after. But ultimately, you want to be setting those things in the simulation and not through lattices. What we're doing here. Now, the simulation, as long as the lattice covers the lattice covers the whole extent of the mesh, this will actually work as you're working along with. The only thing that I would recommend is that it's a much better idea to just match the storyboards that you've got without putting a deformer on there, and by just using the forces of the actual collision objects themselves to get it all set up. And that way you'll be able to remesh it higher or lower. This is sort of just like a last minute tweak to change the look of the splashes. The other thing too that's about this method is the particle render that you'll do of the actual Bifrost particles won't line up with this lattice. You can actually lattice particles as well and move them around and put them into tornadoes and all kinds of shapes and twist them and stuff like that. But it's much better to not use these lattices, even though they're really, really handy to be able to quickly, dirtily manipulate geometry. It's best to just have the particles and the geometry line up right over the top of each other. But you can see here we've quickly changed it from version 1, which is the flatter, more dirtier, sandy kind of explosion, into and version 2, which is the really high, like 50 cal kind of blast version. But yeah, you can see how you can easily change geometry after the fact with those lattices added over the top of the geometry. So we can see here, that's a pretty good result. We've got we've aimed to get the storyboard and the simulation matching somewhat to each other, and the effects supervisor will be really happy with this end result because you've matched the initial signed off kind of direction that he wanted to go with it, he or she wanted to go. So you've got the you've got the look of the explosions of the water matching up with the final simulation that you've set up, and that's really the end objective, is to not just do a whole bunch of stuff and see what it looks like and go back and forth, and that's a very inefficient way to work. What you really have to do with these fluid sims is you have to plan out in advance and drew these little storyboards yourself as an effects artist, and instant message them or send them to your supervisors and just go, hey, is this the kind of look we're going for these sims? So the last thing we're going to be having a look at in terms of review is what to do once you've got to the ultimate high level schmicko version of your sim. It takes 50 minutes to sim per frame. It's really detailed, it's really heavy and unwieldy, and you get review notes to change it. So the way you'd work in this is a sort of fake review note here. We've got, looks good. Would it be possible to increase the force of the wave crashing against the rocks by about 200% to get the water crashing up the rocks? So we've already done this sim. We've not assumed that it's final, but we've done it with the intention of having this shot finaled, and they just want to change it to be more stronger. So, a lot of the scenes for Transformers, the Extinction movie, if you were to open them up today, they would take about 50 minutes to open and would be super, super, super unwieldy. Everything in the scene is heavy. The assets are all 6 gig each. Oh, it's just really slow and arduous and difficult to work with. And this scene is like that. I mean, if you load this up on a pretty fast laptop, you can be sitting there for ages trying to get it loaded up and working and stuff like that, because it's just very detailed. So the trick is, when you get review notes like that, these tiny little review notes can take 6 or 7 weeks to actually achieve if there is not clear communication with the VFX soup or effects supervisor that you're working with. And one of the things that's just so important and so necessary is clear communication between the effects artist that's working on the shot and the VFX supervisor who's giving the review notes. Because you can easily shoot through these quick times and just get 50 different review notes and then change your mind and then go back, and that's just doesn't work with effects. Unfortunately, it's better, it's a better system for animation, for characters or other types of Maya feedback, because it's basically instantaneous curve changes and stuff like that. Same with comp. You can quickly change stuff in comp and re-render it. It's no problem. But simulation's a totally different ballgame. I mean, this kind of scenes can take 2 hours a frame to simulate, and each frame is 2 or 3 gig per frame. So you really need clear communication back and forth. So my advice would be, rather than just hitting the go button and resubmitting a massive, multi-thousand gigabyte file onto the simulation farm or on your computer, I would actually just, take the time to mock up a very, very crude, storyboard of where you're actually talking about the splash height going to. So it's great to send a little instant messenger and go, please make 200% bigger. But all you have to do is take a few seconds to just, sketch over the top of the a frame of the sim and just say, is this the kind of 200% that we're talking about? Because they might actually be meaning, wow, that's way too high, bro. Scale it right back, just a little bit of extra, and you might be thinking something completely different to what they're thinking. And that often is the case of a lot of wasted time and difficulty for, for when you're working. So what you do is you just have to draw that little storyboard, send it to them, and they'll usually more than not write back and say, yes, exactly where you imagined the extra height to be is the same as where I would picture the extra height of that wave crashing. Now the actual thing itself might look slightly different because of the simulation, but the communication back and forth is the most important thing, so that you're able to get good turnaround on these sims. So the scale on this scene is ultra high, ultra slow, ultra unwieldy. I really can't work with it to back and forth test stuff. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the first frame, disable my disk cache, and I'm going to set the voxel size, instead of 0.08, it's going to actually be set to 0.5, which is a very low res blobby kind of looking water, but it'll actually still give me the force and position of the wave. So the thing that's pushing this wave against the cliff is this colliding object here. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to set some keyframes and actually squish the water forwards quickly over 30 frames, and that will actually hopefully put more pressure on the water and then force it up against those rocks really hard. So in an actual real life scenario where this was a film shot, you'd actually have more CPU and RAM horsepower, and you'd have more sort of space for the water to simulate in, but it would also be too slow to demo, like we're using here in this scene. So if you just keep that in mind, you'd be having a lot larger ocean kind of shape that would be a lot slower and more unwieldy, but this is just small for the sake of demonstration. So it's important to know what's moving the water and what's causing the the splashes to happen. You can decrease the gravity a little bit if you want to hit the water up higher. You can also change the collider settings on the rocks. But the most important thing that's forcing this water up against those rocks is actually this wave generating collider that's at the back here. And by pushing that forwards, like not like over one frame, but over 30 frames, it'll be like a kind of like pushing water like against that rock, like a tidal force pushing against it. So we can see here that the once we've simulated these frames, just running it from -50 up to 160, this we can see that the points, if we just increase the point size so we can see it clearly, we can see that that's already spraying a lot higher up the rocks than the last version that we had. So you can see that the version that we did earlier, the water would just go up a little bit onto the rocks and then like flow back down again. But we can clearly see that extra force of that colliding object is really pushing that liquid a lot higher up the collision objects. It's not exactly the same shape as the as the storyboard we did, because the water is behaving in a different way because it's going up and over those rocks. But in any case, the force of it hitting into them is a lot more realistic. And if you were to just sort of like continue that wave motion of that coming in and coming out over say 500 frames, you would see that the height of that high res thing would somewhat match this this scene. So all you have to do now, once you've done it at low res and you've seen, yeah, that actually does force water a lot higher and a lot more with a lot more impact against that rocky surface, all you have to do then is simulate out 450 frames of that water at the higher res setting once you've tested it at low res. See, you could have spent a lot of time playing around with this and seeing how it worked with that high res setting, and every time you simmed it, it would have taken the whole night to get back any results. And we can already see here that this just creates a very interesting tidal kind of movement that water, where you could continuously like repeat this pattern of wave movement, and that would actually just create a really cool looking turbulent peeling wave movement, especially if you have more space to pull back that collision object and get it happening, so that the water's undertowing back underneath the waves that are flowing in, and then pushing up on the rocks as it's coming up and in. That's just going to create a really realistic crashing kind of like phenomenon that's natural, like the way that tides and waves work in real life. So the only thing you have to do to get this going at full res is set your point size back to 1 so you can see it, and then in the voxel size, which is in the Bifrost liquid container, you just clear the scratch cache, and the master voxel size you just set back to the original high res size, which is 0.08. Now with simulations, all these simulations, it's good to clear scratch cache. Don't use a scratch cache for high res sims. Cache it straight to disk, and all you have to do now is just repeat that animation of the colliding object off screen, like pushing that water against the rocks, and then you can just disk cache it and play blast it, and then resubmit it to the VFX supervisor to check out how it looks. And once you've done that, you should get a result that's pretty much exactly what they're looking for in terms of that extra height. But you haven't been wrangling with this ultra heavy, ultra slow scene. You've just switched back to the sort of previous low res scene that you can simulate in a couple of seconds, instead of dealing with this full blown high res, high detail scene that you've got, and like redoing it over and over again to play around with it. Because even this scene takes 5 minutes per frame just to update the sim for one single frame. So it just takes you forever to get the correct settings for it that you want. So just you turn off scratch cache, create a disk cache of that simulation, and once you've done that, all you have to do is just render it out and mesh it and recomp it in Nuke, which will probably take a day, and then you can resubmit it to your supervisor. Well, I hope that review notes techniques is helpful. If there's any questions, please post them onto the FX PhD forums. I hope you've enjoyed the Bifrost course and all the different techniques and things that I've tried to open up to you guys. Effects is a very challenging area. Don't get discouraged by how difficult it might be. And this Bifrost software is just going to really open up amazing water effects and water-based creature designs and water-based costumes and all kinds of amazing stuff for 3D artists all over the world. It's just a great piece of software. Really excited to see what kind of work people are going to create using Bifrost in the future. I think it's going to really open up doors for people to be able to do amazing sequences at home that are just learning Maya, that are students and things like that. And and I hope you really start to get a handle on it, and we'll hopefully see some really awesome Bifrost simulations posted up on Vimeo, and some really nice new shaders and technology coming out soon to support Bifrost in Maya. Well, all the best, guys. It's been great teaching the course, and I'll catch you guys next time.